What's going on? I asked, surveying their smug expressions. They were all gathered around me, faces gleaming with satisfaction, as if they had rehearsed this moment. My in-laws leaned in, practically savoring the tension. Finally, one of them broke the silence, their tone unnervingly gleeful. We need to have a serious talk. I inhaled deeply, forcing my voice to remain steady. All right, go on, I said. Edgar, my husband, exhaled heavily, avoiding my gaze. I sold the house to my parents, he said, pausing dramatically before adding, and I think we should get a divorce. My in-laws exchanged smug glances, their satisfaction palpable, as if they'd orchestrated a silent victory. Without hesitation, I reached for the signed divorce papers, set my wedding ring on the table, and replied, then I guess I'll be leaving. They seemed completely oblivious to the gravity of what was unfolding. My name is Madison, and I'm 50 years old. Years have passed since our marriage, and our children are now independent, living their own lives. I once led the life of an ordinary office worker, but thanks to a friend's encouragement, I found fulfillment as a teacher of handmade accessories, a hobby turned profession. While some might view turning a passion into a career as a mistake, I found true joy in it. Edgar and I met by chance at the company where I worked. He was employed at a client company at the time. As we started seeing each other through work events, our bond grew stronger, and eventually, we married for love. After 3 years, we welcomed a son, healthy, energetic, and full of promise. He graduated from a prestigious university and has since built a happy, prosperous life with his own family. But despite our son's success, Edgar and I grew increasingly distant. He changed, becoming a far cry from the kind, considerate man I had married. Now, he treated me as though I were nothing more than a servant, endlessly demanding and critical. His behavior became more erratic, and his temper flared at the smallest things, often with cruel words to follow. I had long dreamed of escaping this life and starting fresh, but the weight of an unpaid mortgage kept me trapped. To make matters worse, Edgar had quit his job with no explanation, leaving me to carry the financial burden alone while he lounged at home, refusing to help with anything. The house we lived in had been recently rebuilt, and I was the one who had managed the finances and saved for the project. It was my vision, a home that represented my hard work, my aspirations. I didn't want to leave it behind, especially not in Edgar's hands. The mortgage was one thing, but this house symbolized so much more to me. Every detail, from the spacious kitchen to the layout of the rooms, was carefully planned. Edgar had contributed ideas during the design phase, but I had covered the costs myself, and I wanted my choices to be honored. It was supposed to be the culmination of our shared dream, and I had poured so much of myself into it. But the reality was far from the dream. The construction costs spiraled far beyond what we had anticipated, forcing us into a loan that was more than we had ever planned to take on. At our age, it was a daunting financial burden. Still, the thought of living in this new house, filled with the promise of a fresh start, kept me going. Edgar, on the other hand, sulked at the fact that the house didn't fully reflect his desires. He called it a waste of money. This is just throwing money down the drain, he'd complain, his dissatisfaction growing as I ignored him. Over time, he stopped speaking to me altogether, instead using childish tactics to provoke my frustration. I couldn't help but wonder how much longer I would endure this. A few months after settling into our new home, the doorbell rang unexpectedly. I stood up, preparing to answer it, but to my surprise, Edgar got up first, almost as if he already knew who was at the door. Before I could say anything, cheerful voices and laughter filled the entryway. When the living room door opened, I was met by none other than my in-laws, Bradley and Emerson. A wave of tension washed over me. I'd always felt uneasy around them. From the moment we announced our marriage, they had been cold and critical, fixating on my lower social status. Their behavior hadn't changed after our wedding, interfering in ways that made each interaction feel like walking on eggshells. Even though I thought we'd moved past their judgment, this unexpected visit took me by surprise. I greeted them politely, but the tension was palpable. They passed by me without a word, deliberately brushing past me with a shoulder bump. As they admired the house, their comments were laced with envy, especially about the spacious kitchen. Edgar beamed with pride as he showed it off. When they left, their faces looked satisfied, but Edgar's demeanor shifted. His voice grew sharp, his anger palpable. "Hurry up and prepare tea and snacks," he barked. I rushed to comply, but his parents didn't seem impressed. Bradley mumbled under his breath, "Is this the best you can offer?" They quickly finished, and Bradley turned his attention back to the house, his smile returning as he admired the design. "It's quite lovely," he said, more focused on the interior than anything I'd served. Edgar, still grinning, casually suggested his parents move in with us, barely acknowledging my presence. They listened, nodding along before leaving. I stood there, watching them walk away, feeling a chasm of distance between us. Edgar chatted and laughed with his parents, something I hadn't seen in ages. It was as if they were the family he truly belonged to. while I stood on the outside. Following that visit, Edgar's parents began to come more often. Initially, it was just a few times a month, then it escalated to several times a week. Eventually, their visits became almost daily. With each arrival, the criticisms piled on, and Edgar did nothing to stop it. He blamed me for everything, from not listening to him, to causing our son unnecessary suffering. Their disapproval was unrelenting, and I found myself apologizing constantly, even when every part of me wanted to scream in frustration. But it didn't end there. They began showing up more frequently when I wasn't home, leaving behind clear signs of their presence: beer cans, empty bottles, and alcohol stains soaking into our brand new rug. Despite my protests, the house began to carry the scent of alcohol and felt increasingly dirty. It was as if, with every visit, our home was no longer the sanctuary I had worked so hard to create. I couldn't comprehend why Edgar, despite contributing nothing to the household, was always so quick to complain. His gambling habit only deepened my worries. I found remnants of betting slips scattered around the house, a constant reminder of the financial strain he was causing. When I tried explaining the risks of gambling and its impact on our finances, it seemed pointless. His losses were draining us, and the burden was unbearable. One evening, after discovering another slip, I confronted him, trying to stay calm, especially since the money used for gambling is hard-earned through my work. I said, my voice tight with frustration. He simply shrugged, indifferent as always. A month passed with frequent visits from his parents, always when I wasn't around, but one day, I returned home early and was shocked to find them lounging in our house as if they belonged there. My surprise quickly turned to anger. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice tense. They exchanged a look, then one of them responded in a condescending tone, "We were just visiting, dear. It's not like you're ever around." Their dismissive attitude made it clear they saw my presence as an inconvenience. Frustrated and overwhelmed by their insolence, I realized I couldn't continue like this. It was time to take control and make a plan. Soon after, something unusual happened. On a day when I was supposed to be away, the in-laws showed up again. I couldn't help but remark sarcastically, "Well, isn't this a surprise? Seems like you only visit when I'm gone." They ignored my comment, boldly stepping inside. Edgar greeted them with a smile and led them through the house, showing them everything from the kitchen to the bathroom. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was a hidden motive behind their inspection. When they left, their expressions were smug, as if they'd confirmed something important. "What was that all about?" I asked Edgar, trying to get some answers, but he just shrugged dismissively. "None of your business," he muttered, a coldness in his voice that made it clear he was hiding something from me. I suspected he was up to something, but the truth remained elusive. I had no choice but to keep watching. Then, one evening after work, I returned home to find a large moving truck parked in front of our house, emblazoned with the logo of a company called Moving Center. Edgar was talking to the truck driver and representatives, but when our eyes met, he acted like he hadn't seen me and quickly disappeared inside. What shocked me more was the arrival of my in-laws at the same time. They greeted me with casual indifference, and Edgar ushered them into the house, as if everything was perfectly normal. But as I followed them inside, I was stunned by what I saw. The familiar furniture and belongings I had worked so hard for were gone. In their place was a collection of outdated, mismatched furniture, my in-laws' belongings, arranged as though this was their home. I sat down on the sofa, feeling the weight of the situation. They surrounded me, wearing smirky smiles that exuded satisfaction, as though they had orchestrated this all along. Though anxiety bubbled up inside me, I decided to remain calm and wait to see what they would do next. "We need to talk," one of the in-laws finally said, their voice almost gleeful. I braced myself, answering with feigned composure, "What is it?" Edgar sighed deeply, refusing to look at me. "I sold the house to my parents," he said, pausing to gauge my reaction. Then he added, almost casually, "And I think we should get a divorce." His parents nodded in agreement, their smirks growing as they seemingly reveled in my discomfort. But I didn't flinch. I had anticipated this moment. Calmly, I signed the divorce papers, placed my wedding ring on the table, and said, "I'll be leaving the house then." I had long suspected that Edgar and his parents were involved in something shady, especially considering their frequent visits when I wasn't home. To confirm my suspicions, I had installed surveillance cameras around the house, synced to my smartphone. On the first day, I watched the footage of their daily interactions, but one day, I came across something that made my blood run cold: footage of Edgar and his parents joyfully discussing selling the house. It was all part of their plan. Shocked by the revelation, I knew I had to act fast. I quickly began planning my next steps. Using the information from the surveillance cameras, I started researching new places to live and made the decision to transfer the home loan from my name to Edgar's. If they wanted me out of the house, then they could take on the mortgage payments and responsibilities that came with it. The mortgage, a hefty $1,900 each month, had always been paid from my hard-earned salary. I doubted Edgar and his parents could handle such a financial burden, and I was determined not to offer any help. Free from the toxic environment, I moved into a new home, well-decorated, filled with fresh furniture, and ready to embrace a new chapter in my life. On my day off, I relished the idea of resting and sleeping in past noon, but just as I was about to drift off again, the doorbell rang sharply. I was startled to find Edgar and his parents standing at my doorstep, uninvited. "What are you doing here?" I demanded, stepping in front of the door to block their entrance. Without a word, they barged past me and unfurled a document in front of me. "You changed the name on the house loan without our permission," Edgar snapped, his voice full of accusation. I raised an eyebrow, still in disbelief at their audacity. "Yes, I did. After all, you wanted me out, didn't you?" Their faces faltered, and they stammered that they were unemployed and couldn't afford the monthly mortgage. Edgar, frustration spilling over, shouted, "We can't pay that amount." I crossed my arms, my tone steady as I explained the consequences. "If you don't pay, the interest and late fees will pile up, and the bank won't care about your situation." At first, Edgar seemed unconvinced, but after a quick search on his phone, his face drained of color. "What are we going to do?" his mother muttered, her voice shaky. I shrugged, my voice calm but firm. "Maybe look for a job. It's time for a fresh start." Their faces paled further as they grasped the severity of the situation. They admitted they had no savings, no assets, and Edgar was weighed down by gambling debts and a lack of stable income. Desperation crept into their voices as they pleaded with me for help, reminding me of the years we had spent together. "We've been through so much," Edgar added, his tone more pleading than sincere. I felt no sympathy. I stood tall and shut the door in their faces, saying simply, "I'm done, you made your choice." Frustrated and unable to get through to me, they took the matter to the police, but the officers eventually removed them from my property. The situation became too much for them to handle, and they moved into a small, affordable apartment on the outskirts of town. Edgar found a part-time job, which barely supported his family. As for me, my life moved forward. I kept my focus on my work and continued to build a future for myself. In my free time, I started a blog about handmade crafts, and to my surprise, it began to gain traction. My monthly income doubled, and requests for workshops and courses poured in. I had no intentions of remarrying. I was content on my own, navigating life independently. One day, while sorting through some old items, I stumbled upon the household account book from the early years of my marriage. Holding it in my hands brought back memories of the financial struggles we had faced together, but now, with a sense of resolve, I placed it back on the shelf, knowing that I was building a new life and a new happiness on my own terms.